Hello, everybody, and welcome to Connecticut River Conservancy's final trash talk of the season. What is extended producer responsibility? We'll be talking about the ins and outs of EPR, the challenges we face and with the disposal of our waste and the opportunities that EPR brings. My name is Stacy Leonard, and I'm the events organizer and Source to Sea cleanup coordinator here at CRC. We're really thrilled to welcome two guest speakers today to share their expertise on this topic. First, we'll have Jennifer Heaton-Jones, who is the Executive Director of the Housatonic Resources Recovery Association and the Chair of the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council. We'll also have Sydney Harris, who is the Policy and Programs Manager and Packaging Lead for the Product Stewardship Institute, which is based in Boston, though Sydney is currently in New Hampshire. And as usual, we have our three Connecticut River Conservancy river stewards here to share what's happening in each of our watershed states. Kathy Urffer will speak about New Hampshire and Vermont, Andrea Donlon about Massachusetts, and Kelsey Wentling in Connecticut. Before we get to the presentation, just a couple of quick reminders. We really encourage your questions and ask you to put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. And we are recording this for future access, and we'll be posting a link on our YouTube channel and on our website. And I will be sharing an email after the presentation later today with more resources, action steps, and a link and all the links that you need to know. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey Wentling to give us a little bit of context on the problem and why CRC is involved.
All right, thank you all for coming. My name is Kelsey. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the river steward for Connecticut River Conservancy in the state of Connecticut. So as many of you know, each September we host our annual Source to Sea cleanup. This year was actually our 25th cleanup. We saw a great turnout of volunteers, and this is one of the events that we really treasure because it brings volunteers from all four states, New Hampshire, Vermont, Mass, and Connecticut, out to their local waterways to act as stewards. This data you're seeing in front of you is from our trash tally in 2020. We are working on updating it for 2021 and processing all that data, hopefully sometime in the next month or so, and we'll have new numbers out there. As you can imagine, our cleanup last year in 2020 was a bit unusual, as were most things. So the numbers you're seeing here, while they do seem high, are actually lower than what we see in a normal year. So each year with these thousands of volunteers going out, we are seeing tons and tons of trash out there. As I said, it's a great event, but our ultimate goal is actually to stop hosting this cleanup event because there's no more trash littering our waterways and parks. So this talk today is really about moving from addressing the problem after the fact, after trash is already in our environment, and stopping it from getting there in the first place. Next slide. All right, so what's leading to this waste crisis that we're seeing today? And I'm gonna throw in a couple different factors because I think it's really easy for us to pin blame on individuals, on litter bugs, and on buying things we don't need. And that certainly is part of the equation that leads to waste in our environment, but it's not the only thing. So overconsumption, buying things that are easy to throw away, that is a personal responsibility some of us are able to take on to buy things that can be reused and make sure we're disposing them as best as we possibly can. But it's not the only thing. So next. This is an item that often gets left out of the equation and the focus of today. So bringing producers into this equation and making sure that it's not just consumers and individuals who are held responsible for waste disposal and management, but also those who are actually making the products. We don't have a ton of choices in the types of things we're able to buy sometimes. So asking those who are producing our goods to actually help us out here, make us items that are more sustainable, can be reused more, that is integrated into EPR, what we'll be talking about today, and bringing that responsibility back to those making the product. Next. Another aspect of our fractured waste system at the moment is our waste management system is really stressed. So for example, in Connecticut, we have an incinerator that is going to be retired soon. A lot of municipalities have struggled to get their recycling out, and where they used to make money, some are now actually having to pay to get rid of their recycling. Composting is not always commonplace. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of getting our waste management system up to par. And then last, and one more. For Connecticut River Conservancy specifically, this transboundary issue is of great importance to us. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 4 different states that we cover, and we work as hard as we can to make sure that laws and policies that are enacted within one state are coherent with those enacted in other states, because we recognize that a piece of packaging that ends up in our rivers up north is eventually going to flow down to Massachusetts or Connecticut. It does not necessarily just stop at the border of Mass and Connecticut, despite the laws that we may have in Connecticut. So we really work hard to make sure that we have consistent laws between states. Next slide. And before I hand it over to Jen, I did want to touch on some of the priority items. These are all identified through our Source to Sea cleanup each September. So on the left here, that's some of our outreach material relevant to our Stop Trash Before It Starts campaign. Again, getting to this idea that ultimately, we hope we don't even have to do the cleanup in the future, because we are preventing litter and debris from getting to our waterways in the first place. That being said, we always see thousands and thousands of beverage containers, which is why we have been pushing for bottle bills updates in all of our states, continuing to do that in states like Massachusetts. Looking at tires, again, another item that's actually really hard to dispose of that we find hundreds or even thousands of in the river, and then styrofoam. All these things we hope we can push on these campaigns to make sure that we're reducing the amount that gets produced, ending up in our rivers. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jen.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm just gonna fix something on my screen. I am the Executive Director of the Housatonic Resources Recovery Authority. I oversee 14 municipalities in Western Connecticut, and I volunteer as the chair of the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council. I'm going to lay the groundwork on a few materials we have issues and concerns with, starting with gas cylinders, and then my colleague Sydney from the Product Stewardship Institute will dig deeper on what is EPR. Although I'm speaking on behalf of the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council, these are not just Connecticut issues. Material management is a universal issue. And I just want you to take a moment and take this in for a second. Think about this. Every human, no matter their race, religion, financial status, etc., makes waste. Yet not everyone takes responsibility for their waste, and it's likely why we have litter issues. So I do want to thank you for being here today and wanting to learn more, and hopefully we will inspire you to take some action later. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with cylinders. There are various types of cylinders we are left to manage, and although many have return and exchange programs, often municipalities are left dealing with these unwanted and discarded cylinders. Not all gas cylinders are considered hazardous, but they all have an end of life. So we need an end of life management program. Today, I'm going to focus on the cylinder issue, propane cylinders. So we have single-use propane, 1 pound camping cylinders you typically buy for hiking or camping. Refillable propane that you often get at retail, and you can take them back to retail. They typically run about 7 pounds or higher. Most are the common 20-pound gas grill tank everyone's pretty familiar with. And then there are self-refillable propane tanks. They're for 1-pounders made by Flame King, not very popular here on the East Coast, but very popular on the West Coast. And then we do have propane exchange programs from AmeriGas and Blue Rhino. So this is pretty much what we're focusing on with our issues with gas cylinders. Next slide, please. So what's the problem with cylinders? They're really difficult to manage and they're difficult to recycle. Residents who utilize our local recycling centers or transfer stations, whatever you might call them, they really want one thing. They want to get rid of their cylinder, or they want to get rid of their stuff. And they want it to be easy and convenient. The problem we are left with is how to manage and pay for the disposal. Many of us do have vendors who will take our 20-pound tanks to recycle them, but they require a fee. And although there are some free programs for good tanks, there's almost always the fee for those rusty tanks. And there is no one, at least in our area in Connecticut, that will collect and transport those 1-pound single-use propane tanks. And they're also known as DOT 39. In order for a scrapyard to take them, they actually have to be devalved and a hole punctured into them. They actually want 2 holes punctured for their own safety before discarding them in our scrap metal containers. And our transfer station operators and our municipal managers really don't want that to occur. They don't want the risk of their operators puncturing holes in a flammable, explosive material or device, and nor does OSHA. So that would be a real big no-no for them. So difficult to manage. We have very few outlets. Nearly all scrap yards don't want them. It's a real issue with litter. We actually have thousands of cylinders are left behind in our parks every year. DEEP estimates about 10,000 in Connecticut state parks, and Yosemite National Park actually reported about 20 to 25,000 1-pound cylinders left a year. And they actually have to truck those 2 hours to a low-grade hazardous waste facility. They're costly, they're a cost burden to our municipalities, and they're dangerous. Cylinders are often hidden in the recycling stream and are explosive, and I will show you a little bit about that. Next slide, please. This is actually what they look like after they've exploded. This is actually a 20-pound cylinder, 20-pound grill tank. Next slide, and this is the quick video. These 3 gentlemen are just standing, and this is one gentleman standing waiting for the material to go through this baler, and a 1-pound cylinder, likely what someone thought was empty, went through the baler and exploded. The smallest amount of propane will explode. So this is pretty serious, and it's a dangerous situation for our material recovery facilities and waste to energy plants. Thank you. So the next item I just want to cover is tires, and you can go to the next slide. Many of our municipalities do not have an outlet for tires, or they're too costly to accept at their local drop-off. We have a serious issue with illegal dumping. They are a direct result of market failure and economic inefficiencies. Due to the lack of markets, tires are discarded directly into the environment in landfills and open tire stockpiles, or randomly dumped. All of these disposal methods involve costs such as transportation and processing, and social cost in the form of risk to human health and the environment. Many of you know that stockpile tires can catch fire and burn indefinitely or provide breeding grounds for disease-carrying mosquitoes. And illegal dumped tires are costly to clean up and have a negative impact to the environment. Voluntary systems have not proven to work. The EPA has been studying the concerns of illegal dumping tires since the mid-1970s. So over 50 years, and we still can't get the manufacturers and producers to take responsibility. To date, no state has formally taken action to resolve the economic and environmental concerns we have left for the cost burden of collection, transportation, and disposal of these items. So you can take a guess. Of course, we believe the solution is EPR. Next slide, please. I'm going to cover packaging very quickly. Next slide. Just that the issue you should all be aware of, that municipalities actually bear the highest risk when it comes to contracts, not our material recovery facilities. When the markets tank, municipalities basically pay for it. And they don't really lose the material recovery facilities. We do, the taxpayers. There's poor public outreach and education. It's very inconsistent. I believe the greenwashing also and the inconsistent education as a result of contamination, or contamination as a result of the inconsistent education. We have very low recycling rates on recycling throughout the Northeast in the United States, partly due to, again, lack of public education and outreach, greenwashing. And then we have the litter issue, environmental impact, the municipal cost, the burden, and the lack of accountability for that. Next slide, please. So what is the solution? We believe it's EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. It is a proven tool, and producers share that responsibility and the burden of end-of-life management. They create a plan that includes collection, transportation, and disposal. And I'm going to let Sydney cover more of the details of EPR, but we really do need collection systems that are convenient and easy and free for our residents, and they need to have more shared responsibility between all of the stakeholders. Next slide. Just I want to point out that as the chair of the Connecticut Product Stewardship Council, I did introduce EPR legislation for those gas cylinders in 2020. Due to COVID, it never had a hearing. We spent the summer and fall modifying the language in partnership with the Product Stewardship Institute, and we created new legislation and new language for January of 2021 legislation, and that was coupled with tires and smoke detectors. So we actually had an EPR law introduced in Connecticut for all three products. And the bill passed out of the Environment Committee nearly unanimously. It made it through fiscal analysis, but it never made it to the House calendar. This describes the reason for the bill, which I think I will want to point out that they are, they point out that these are items that are necessary for life, but are hazardous materials to the environment. And I think this, this little paragraph says it well of why the Joint Committee had supported the bill. My last slide is that I just encourage you all to take action. It's pretty simple. If you're interested in seeing an EPR program in your state, please contact your representatives. And I think the most important thing is to always understand that our lawmakers need our help understanding issues. They need guidance to get to a solution. They review hundreds and hundreds of bills a year. None of them are experts on the topics they are going to review and decide on. They really need us. They need the boots on the ground experts to bring it to their attention, educate them, support them to pass these important regulatory initiatives that will save us time and money and protect employees and the environment. I'm going to leave with my contact information. It's here if you want to contact me after today. And I am going to hand it off to Sydney Harris from the Product Stewardship Institute, who will really dig deep into what EPR is.
Thanks, Jen, and hello, everyone. I'm Sydney Harris from the Product Stewardship Institute, Policy and Programs Manager here, and our lead on packaging EPR specifically, but I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about packaging and also just generally about what EPR is, as Jen mentioned. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Just a bit about PSI. We are a 20-year-old nonprofit organization based in Boston, as Stacy mentioned, and we focus on building capacity for product stewardship in EPR. And we really do that by convening public and private sector folks in dialogue to really craft effective policies. So we have government members and board members, state agencies and local governments from all over the country. And we also have multi-stakeholder partners who are supportive of EPR. They can be companies or recyclers or environmental organizations or international governments or anybody else, because we try to bring all those folks together for effective policy. And we work on over 20 different types of consumer products. So as Jed mentioned, gas cylinders, tires. We worked with Jen on those. We work on mattresses, electronics, all kinds of things. So if you can go to the next slide, please. We mostly focus our efforts on building capacity for EPR because we believe it is the centerpiece of a circular economy. And I'll explain a little bit more what that means on the next slide. It's a law that extends a producer's, I don't know why the R in producer got cut off. Sorry about that, but that's the producer's responsibility financially and sometimes with management as well for everything that they put on the market. So it really it tries to bring in that accountability for the producers of these consumer products and packaging. And it says, you not only need to look upstream at how you're designing these things and minimize the environmental footprint of those, but you also need to look downstream and take responsibility for what happens to these things after consumers use them. Usually, hopefully that's reuse and recycling. For some things like medical sharps that can't be recycled, that's safe disposal. So it depends on the product. Next slide, please. So there are actually already 124 EPR laws for different types of consumer products in the US. They're in 33 states and Washington, DC, as you can see here. And if you go to the next slide, there are many EPR laws in the region of the Connecticut River. So we have EPR laws on the books in Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. And Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about some of those, so I'm not going to go into detail here. If you go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to, you can click a couple times. I don't know what happened with the animations here. Sorry. Thank you. That's perfect. If you take a look at this very simple schematic, I wanted to kind of share with you how these programs work in practice. So I use the example of paint. PaintCare, an organization representing paint producers and paint brands. Think like, I don't know, Benjamin Moore and those types of things. They formed because states passed paint EPR laws. And the way these laws works is over here on the top left, you're the consumer in green here, and you buy a can of paint for your house. And you might pay a small recycling fee when you buy that can of paint. So maybe if you buy a gallon of paint, maybe it's 75 cents extra that you pay. And then when you're done, you're going to return that can of paint to the hardware store where you bought it. There are other examples. Your municipality might run a collection event on a Saturday and give you a flyer that says like, hey, come down with your leftover paint today. So there's other ways to give it back. But frequently with paint, especially, you're going to return that to the hardware store, which is really convenient for people. And then that hardware store, they got that can of paint from the paint producer. And when the paint producer sold the paint to the hardware store, they also had to pay a fee on that can of paint to PaintCare, this organization that exists to collect that money. And then it has to spend that money from paint producers on, transportation and processing of all those leftover paint cans that you return. So paint recycling and education and outreach for consumers so that you can return your paint. And then, staff and overhead for the organization of PaintCare, and also pays the state to oversee and enforce the program. So PaintCare collects all this money from the producers of paint, and it's basically a fee that the paint producers have to pay just for the privilege of putting their paint on the market. And that money covers the management of that paint. And that's how they take accountability for that. So if you go to the next slide, there are, like I said, EPR for many types of consumer products, and they can vary, a little bit product to product, but there are some really fundamental elements of most EPR systems. We're talking about legislation here. EPR is not a voluntary system, it's a legislative solution because that really levels the playing field for all producers. We don't want just Benjamin Moore, for example, to have to pay that fee. We want all the paint producers to have to comply and contribute. And then producers are responsible in these programs for financing and managing, end of life recycling and reuse and sometimes, safe disposal. They form a stewardship organization like PaintCare that manages the program for them. And then retailers often, like that hardware store, voluntarily collect products. A lot of retailers like that because it brings more feet through the door. So if I go to return my paint can, then I might be more inclined to see something else I need and then buy it. There are performance goals and convenience standards in these programs, and those are really important because we need these laws to be enforceable and we need accountability in the system. So, the paint law might say something like, you have to, PaintCare, you have to achieve, X% recycling rate of all the paint you put on the market. You're not succeeding unless 85% or more of that is recycled, for example. And then there's government oversight of industries management plan. So PaintCare has to submit all kinds of information to the state, every state where it operates, and the state has to oversee, ultimately that program and find, non-compliant producers and bring them into compliance and make sure that things are, the program is meeting those performance goals, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really important piece. And next slide, please. So the EPR landscape is evolving at a really fast pace. This is actually just a map of packaging EPR. You can see that back in 2020, back in 2000, feels like a same length of time, but back in 2000, there was EPR for packaging. This was actually one of the first products covered by EPR in the world, and it was in Western Europe and Southeast Asia. And by 20 years later, by this year, it has really exploded and expanded to basically every continent except for Antarctica. And then what we expect to see is by 2025, even more adoption of EPR, especially for packaging. So these laws are really expanding at a tremendous pace. Next slide, please. And they're doing that because they work. So they are proven to be effective. They are proven to increase recycling rates and reduce contamination. So these are just some examples of packaging EPR. In Belgium, they've had packaging EPR since 1994. Their recycling rate for packaging and paper products, that's what PPP there means, is 92%. And their contamination rate in that stream is less than 10%. In British Columbia, Canada, they've had packaging EPR since 2014. They've already reached a 90% recycling rate, so they've caught up pretty fast to Belgium, and their contamination rate is also below 10%. And by comparison, in the US, our average recycling rate for packaging and paper products is 50%, and it has been 50% for 20 years. So we have not improved recycling rates in 2 decades. And our contamination rates are consistently on average above 25%, which is relatively appalling. So if you go to the next slide, there is a lot of legislative momentum in the US for EPR for packaging specifically. And I'm leaning on packaging a little because that's my product area, so it's my favorite. But we had the first 2 laws in the US actually that were EPR for packaging passed this year. So this summer, they passed in Oregon and Maine. And I put a little circle there because, Connecticut is working really hard right now to develop packaging EPR legislation. So, expect to see a bill in 2022 and beyond. I think many states like those highlighted in green here have been hard at work introducing bills or preparing bills for the legislative session. There's also a federal bill called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that would implement national EPR for packaging among a host of other interventions for plastic and packaging waste. So, that includes national EPR for packaging, but it also would include a national bottle bill and bag bans and fees and all kinds of really interesting policy tools. It's a very long bill, so I won't go through the whole thing here, but keep an eye on that as well. If you go to the next slide, please. So you'll have to indulge me here because I am a former teacher and I love a little walkthrough, and I'm going to try to break down for you exactly how waste management can look for consumer packaging and recyclables in the US. Right now, this is what it looks like right now. And for policy hawks in the crowd, yes, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but here's you're a consumer, and I always modify this for whatever holiday is coming up. Let's go with Thanksgiving. You're going to buy a gravy boat in this example. All right. So if you click once, Stacy, let's say you order your gravy boat and it comes in a box, and then it's breakable. So it's got those air-filled pillows in it, and it's also got styrofoam peanuts in there. So you get your gravy boat, which is what you wanted, and you also get a whole bunch of packaging material that you maybe didn't want. So click one more time. what happens to all that stuff? Well, you take that cardboard box and you go, I know this is recyclable, and maybe I'm one of the 50% of Americans who has access to curbside recycling. So I'm going to put it in my curbside recycling bin. And a recycling truck comes and takes that away. Click one more time. The air-filled pillows and the styrofoam peanuts, let's say you're one of most people in the US who does not have access to some sort of in-store take-back program for those. So you put those in your trash can, like most folks. Next click, please. So what happens after that, right? That's kind of when we as the consumers stop really seeing and interacting with what happens to our waste. The recycling truck, in theory, is taking your cardboard box to a MRF, a big facility like the one you saw in the gas cylinders video, where they're processing all the stuff, they're sorting all the stuff, and then maybe it goes to a pulper, and et cetera, and eventually gets turned into a new box. But we don't really know if that's happening most of the time. And we just heard from Jen and others how bad our recycling system really is right now. And so if we're only reaching 50% recycling of most PPP, we can't really be certain that that cardboard box is going back into new cardboard materials, but maybe. So if you click one more time, what happens to the trash? Well, we're more familiar with this, right? It's either going to a landfill, or maybe if you're in Connecticut or other places in the US, it's going to an incinerator. Maybe it's escaping the trash collection system and it's just going straight into the environment. And all of those outcomes are not optimal, right? So click one more time. The real kicker here, as Jen mentioned, is that you are bankrolling this system as a consumer, and your local governments are footing the bill with your tax dollars. So that is really where the problem lies and what EPR tries to address. So if you go to, this is where we're at right now. If you go to the next slide, we'll do the same walkthrough, but we'll do it a little differently, because we're going to envision now what a typical EPR for PPP, again, packaging and paper products program might look like. So here you are again, and you're buying the same exact gravy boat. And click one more time. Let's say it comes in the same 3 materials for now. Click one more time. Now you're going to put your cardboard box in the same curbside thing, and the truck is going to come and get it. And I click one more time. This time, we can be confident that cardboard is getting recycled because we know EPR succeeds at increasing recycling rates. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but click one more time. The reason it succeeds is that now, instead of you paying your municipality through taxes and your municipality trying to fund the whole recycling system, basically through contracts with haulers and MRFs, Gravy Boats Inc., which I made up and hopefully is not a real company, they have to pay to put that stuff on the market. So just to sell you that gravy boat, they had to pay fees on the box and the air-filled pillows and the styrofoam peanuts. And they really had to pay that to a stewardship organization, which I've left out of this for simplicity. But ultimately, that money is going to flow probably to your municipality, or maybe even directly to those service providers, those haulers and MRFs. And that sustained funding is going to have to be sufficient to maintain the recycling system, because it's required by law. And that's why EPR succeeds at increasing recycling rates. So then if you click one more time, what about the other stuff? So the air-filled pillows, these are a complicated material. They fall into a category called flexible plastics, which is basically stuff that's flexible. It's like wiggly, not rigid. So maybe, only 4% of flexibles are currently recycled into things like Trex decking, and that's kind of it. They're really not recyclable, right? They're really problematic, and they get stuck in the machinery at MRFs, and they really mess up the recycling system. But, the Gravy Boats Inc. money that's going into the system, and the money from all the other consumer goods, companies as well, that can fund things like research and development to figure out how to better either design those materials and or come up with other technology that can effectively manage them. Maybe there are pilot programs we can run to get that out of the curbside bin so it doesn't disrupt the MRF, but it can go to a different facility that can actually manage that and recycle it. So there's my little dude doing research, and that's what that represents. And if you click one more time, maybe the foam peanuts still end up in your trash and they go to landfill. But if you click again, there's also an opportunity with EPR systems to phase out really problematic materials, because what we can do is we can adjust how much it costs to put each of these things onto the market. So it doesn't have to cost the same for Gravy Boats Inc. to give you a box and an air-filled pillow and foam peanuts. It could cost them a small amount to give you a box. It could cost them a little bit more to give you a pillow, and it could cost them an exorbitant amount if we wanted to give you styrofoam peanuts. This is just an example, but like say we decide those are too problematic and we want to disincentivize them, that's how EPR can do that. And so it could become so expensive for producers to choose that type of packaging that they just don't. They don't choose it, and we've phased it out of the market. That's in theory how this can work. If you click a couple more times, the other things that the program will pay for, and again, this is the producers paying, is that consumer education, infrastructure expansion, market development for those end materials, and of course, providing data and transparency in the system. And then one more time, so that just results in, again, more recycling, less contamination in the stream through that better, well-funded education, less disposal overall, because there can be investment into end markets for things to get them actually recycled, maybe even reuse infrastructure. Ideally, there could be design for environment innovations here, and ultimately upstream change that we all want to see. So that's the idea of, in a concept form, how EPR can work for packaging and paper products. So if you go to the next slide, I want to just close by mentioning that, we do believe EPR is the centerpiece of a circular economy here, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. And there are really important additional complementary policies that really were always envisioned to be passed with EPR for a whole circular economy vision. So you can still just outright ban certain problematic things that shouldn't be on the market. You can still phase out and in other products or toxics or ingredients or additives with other policies. You can have, reuse directives and tax incentives. You can have bottle deposit bills. All of those things are complementary effective policies as well. And then alongside that, what we really need is EPR to be the foundation of that system, so that for anything that is going on to the market, there is a comprehensive solution that is sustainably funded to manage those things and holds producers accountable for their role in creating waste. So if you go to the next slide, just wanted to end on a little note about PSI. So, again, I mentioned we have memberships that are available for state and local government agencies. We have partnerships for everybody else. That brings you into our sort of community. It's big, but it's also close knit. And we have, strategic calls and all kinds of resources that are available to those members and partners. And we also do consulting projects and research, all kinds of great things. So I have my contact info on the next slide. And I will turn it back over to Kathy, I believe.
Great, thanks so much, Sydney. Such great information. So we're going to go through, we want to leave a lot of time for a conversation, just a quick go through of the states that we work in. I'm Kathy Urffer, I'm the river steward in Vermont and New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, there's a lot of opportunity for change. And I think one of the things that Sydney really pointed out is the economy that is associated with EPR bills, both in the processing of the materials themselves, but also in having a cleaner, result at the end that can then be a valued thing that creates entirely different economies. So in New Hampshire right now, the one EPR bill that exists is a mercury thermostat take-back program, which was established in 2008. And short of the chat that just came in, 5 seconds ago, I was not aware of any upcoming potential EPR legislation. Tim Egan, who is on the call with us today, thank you, Tim, says that he will actually be reintroducing a bottle bill in the coming 2022 session. So that's really exciting. And yes, we are glad to help. Stacey, you can click on to the next one. In Vermont, Maine, and California right now are kind of in the lead in terms of the number of EPR bills in the state. So all of these bills, plus while it's not considered like formally EPR, Vermont also has a bottle bill and has for years. What has been introduced in the last session, our EPR legislation focused on packaging and paper products. And then in previous years, also a bill was introduced on motor vehicle tires. Twice that was introduced. And then also prescription drugs. And so there's definitely potential things happening in Vermont in this coming year. And we're hopeful that Vermont will join, Oregon and Maine in passing and packaging and paper products EPR in this coming year. And with that, I'll pass it off to Andrea, who is our river steward in Massachusetts.
Thanks, Kathy. So Massachusetts has had a hard time passing any EPR bills. The only one that I know of is the Mercury Management Act from 2006. Sydney's slide had a bullet item mentioning pharmaceuticals, and maybe later, if it comes up, she could explain that. But there are lots of waste ban items that have been passed. So there's a whole bunch of things that people are not allowed to put in the trash. And then that has spurred some recycling programs. But, Massachusetts has long had this reputation as being taxachusetts. So companies that don't want EPRs usually play that card as calling EPR a tax. So it's been really hard. There's been bills for paint recycling, mattress recycling, mattress EPR, and those have been kind of worked on for years, and it hasn't quite passed yet. There's one now also for smoke detectors, and then also packaging. So hoping that at some point the momentum will happen, and excited that Maine and Oregon had passed a packaging EPR, and maybe that will convince people in Massachusetts that it's time for EPR. Next, I'll pass this back to Kelsey to talk about Connecticut.
All right, so just to wrap up, in Connecticut, we do already have several EPR bills in place. One I didn't mention, sort of an EPR bill, is the bottle bill, which was just updated in 2021, and several of those changes will go into place in the next couple of years. But looking ahead, some of the EPR legislation we're excited about was talked about today. So packaging, certainly, we're supportive of, excuse me, as well as gas cylinders. On top of that, we've been working on EPR for tires for several years now. As Jen mentioned, this did get combined with cylinders and smoke detectors, and that made it out of the committee with a lot of support. So we're hopeful that if we continue to push on tires, that's something that can be enacted and keep that out of our environment. And then, of course, batteries too could be integrated into this EPR framework. And for our final slide, I'm just going to reiterate some of what Jen also said, is that what you can do from this call, from the materials that we're going to send out, is simply get in touch with your legislator, tell them about EPR, explain, if you can, how it works and which items you are passionate about having EPR for. Kathy mentioned this in the chat, but sometimes it takes truly just a couple of constituents or really motivated community members to reach out to their elected official and let them know that this is an issue they want to see resolved. So please use your voice. It is more powerful than you think. And thank you for coming today. I think we'll move on to questions.
Great. Thanks, everybody. That was so informative. And I know there's some questions in the chat already. Feel free to keep adding to it. And I'm going to do my best to try and siphon through them. So earlier on, there was a question about how did Belgium get to where they are today with EPR? How convenient is it? And what does community education look like?
I can jump in there and try to answer that one. I mean, I don't know the entire history of how Belgium got to its current program, but I will say that we've done a series of webinars called EPR Masterclass series that are available for free online that have tons of case studies of many European programs, and that may be of interest to folks here. I can drop a link in the chat to our on-demand webinars page, and you can find the EPR Masterclass webinars there. But in short, I mean, Belgium is one of the older EPR for packaging programs in the world. So not the first, but one of the first programs that emerged in the early 90s. And so they've been around the block a few times. They've had a lot of years to iron out the kinks. And their system is just highly, highly efficient. They have a packaging stewardship organization, just like I mentioned, you know, like kind of like PaintCare, but you know, for packaging, that kind of runs and administers the program for them, oversees the recycling system, makes sure collection happens from consumers in a very convenient way. There are standards for how that happens, and then you know, and then they are also responsible for making sure the recycling of that material happens, right? So and then they're evolving their system even now to include some of those financial incentives that I mentioned, to even further kind of tweak what it costs to put things on the market there. And so that will also further drive kind of upstream design changes. So I encourage you to check out more about that in our masterclass series. I believe their system is called FOST Plus. Yes, here's their homepage. I'll also put that in the chat. So it may or may not have
jump
an
in
English.
while
Yeah.
Sydney's putting that in the chat. I'll also just mention that one of the things that we hope that EPR will bring, not just for packaging, but any of these products that we have issues with, is that we need consistent public education at the local level. And it often doesn't occur because we have lack of funding. So municipalities, I can speak for the state of Connecticut, every town is required to have a recycling coordinator. The recycling coordinator is often a title, not a position. So in my case, in my 14 towns, many of my chief elected officials, my mayors and first selectmen or the town clerk is the recycling coordinator. They know nothing about recycling. They know nothing about material management. They're not educated, and they don't have the drive. They don't have the interest, but they're providing a name to the state. In the requirements for public education and outreach, it would be required that we have consistent messaging across the state, that there is designated folks who would take that on. And, you know, like with PaintCare, we see billboards, there's social media, there's Pandora commercials. I mean, when PaintCare happened, the EPR program for PaintCare, people knew about it and they all had the same message. They all saw the same logo. Here, we live in silos. We're in New England, we're very autonomous. We do our own thing. Every town from town has a different recycling message. That would change. And I think that's very important for our residents to have consistent understanding, and greenwashing hopefully would go away too, where you can't say that it's recyclable when it's not.
Great, thank you. I think that kind of covers the question that was asked about what progress is being made across states and regions. Is there anything more either of you would want to add to that? Especially around, you know, reducing the differences from state to state on what is recyclable, what's not, what people can do. We have single stream, we have dual stream.
Yeah, just that understand that recycling and material management is very local because it depends on your local resources. Do you have a material recovery facility close by, or do you have a glass recycler or glass processor in your state? Do you have a waste to energy plant? Where does your material go? It really is local, and extended producer responsibility legislation Most of the time, we hope, particularly with packaging, we'll utilize the current infrastructure. We're not looking to build new infrastructure. We're looking to take advantage of what we already have. We already have some great private haulers. We already have material recovery facilities. So it really becomes, it will still continue to be local.
Okay, thank you. Christine asks, it's my understanding that some types of EPR are more desirable than others and that it's better to use the term product stewardship. Do you have an opinion on this? Thinking about the names of your agencies.
Yeah, let me jump in here and just explain the difference. So those terms actually mean different things. Product stewardship is an umbrella term that can refer to all kinds of programs, including voluntary programs. And it just means, you know, producers are trying to take some responsibility for their stuff. But EPR is not voluntary. As I mentioned, EPR is a law. So EPR is a type of product stewardship, but it is a specific mandatory type of product stewardship. So there's a distinction there. And maybe I'm not saying it's the best term that ever existed, but just wanted to kind of point out that key distinction, that what we're talking about here is a law. Because here's the thing, guys, voluntary programs, they're not working, right? We have an onslaught of voluntary programs from industry, from consumer packaged goods companies announced every single day. That's been going on for decades. And if they were working, well, we wouldn't have this waste crisis that we continue to have. So it's time for legislation, and that's why we're focusing on EPR.
Great, thanks for that clarification. I see that if I look further down, Peg also tried to help weigh in on that.
I would just quickly say that when you're working with or reaching out to your representatives, the lawmakers, and if you know they are sensitive to some of the language, be creative and talk about producer responsibility in a different way. You know, we're hoping that those who are making these products and putting them into the environment will take responsibility, just a play on words, and then eventually soften them to EPR. I mean, the fact of the matter is that's what it is. It's extended. It's the producer. We're extending the responsibility onto the producer, right? But if you know that you have a representative that's sensitive to that, then work around that.
Great. Let's see, going on to another question. I live in New Hampshire, but near the border of Vermont, and often grocery shop in Vermont. I only recently learned about glass bottle redemption there, which I think must be part of the bottle bill. I was wondering if anyone knows what happens to the glass. Does it really get recycled? The redemption center had no idea when I asked, and I heard that glass is energy intensive and should be used multiple times before recycling to break even comparing to plastic bottles. Is that true?
So I'll take this one because I have a special program for collecting just glass, source separation of glass, for the reason that in the state of Connecticut, glass is a state mandate recyclable. Some folks in Massachusetts call it a waistband. So when I discovered that our glass in the single stream was actually not getting recycled and was being shipped 500 miles out of the state of Connecticut to a landfill, despite the fact that we had the nation's largest glass recycler in our state, Strategic Material, I was mortified. And I wish I could just show you the photos on screen, what MRF glass looks like. It's just, it's all the fines and residual from, it's the contamination from single stream. And it's shredded paper, it's bottle caps, lighters, and tampon dispensers, and you wouldn't believe what's in there. It's horrifying. And in fact, most of the glass doesn't get recycled. It's MRF glass. If it's source separated or if it's bottle bill glass, it has great value and it does get recycled. It's either being shipped to Strategic Material and it's being made into bottle to bottle or fiberglass, or in our case, some of our materials going to Urban Mining. It's a new company in Connecticut, and it helps make cement. It reduces carbon emissions by 50% of what it typically takes to make cement. Now there, NRRA, which is the Northeast Resources Recovery Association, they're not an authority. They also send glass for Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts to companies that make aggregate. So it's sort of the underlay of sidewalks and parking lots and roads. So it is being recycled, but I'll go back to the original question slide comment. Yes, reuse is always preferable before recycling. So we would like to see more reuse programs. The state of Oregon, anyone who's updating your bottle bill, Oregon actually introduced a reuse program within their state as well as when they enhanced their bottle bill. So I highly recommend wherever we can to recirculate our glass bottles.
Great.
I think also in Massachusetts, at least Western Mass, and Michael Padavina, I see you on the screen. You might have more recent information, but yeah, most of it, the non-bottle bill glass gets ground up and used either as sort of like fill in sidewalks, or also like a layer of, instead of dirt in a landfill, it would be used.
It's alternate daily cover.
Right, okay. And that's considered recycled, which is
It,
and then
which shouldn't be.
and Michael, you're on mute, but also I think they're looking into, there's a company in New York that needs to make like spun glass insulation, and so bottles could go to that, which seems like a better use than the landfill lining.
Well, the glass is, just to be accurate, it's used as a drainage layer. You know, so it fills a function a lot like sand does. So, you know, that's the biggest use in Massachusetts is to cap landfills and for landfill management. Not quite the kind of idea that I think we would like to see happen with that material to be made into something a little bit more, with a little bit more function.
Great, thank you. We're nearing the end of the hour, so I just wanted to take a moment and say extreme thanks to Jen and Sydney, our guest presenters, for the wealth of information you've shared today. And to remind everybody that I'll be sending an email and you'll get all their contacts, other links, a copy of this slide presentation if you're interested. But I will say, you know, if anybody wants to raise a hand and ask one more question. Oh, wait, I see another question coming in. Is there any chance some of you would be available to testify during the public hearing for the New Hampshire bottle bill when heard by whichever committee it is in?
Yes.
Absolutely, and I can put you in touch with others who testified on behalf of Connecticut bottle bill expansion last year.
Great. I see a hand. Oh, Timothy, please unmute.
Hi, everyone. Yes, actually, my friend John Swan was the one who asked that question. I'm the state rep that has filed the bottle bill, which will be coming in this current session. I did put my email in the chat. So if anyone does have interest to testify or information that we can use to submit with our testimony, that would be great. And I appreciate this group and this conversation tremendously.
Thank you. Thanks for being here as well. Any other last thoughts, questions? All right, well, thanks again, everybody. We're grateful for you putting in time to talk with us today. Stay connected with CRC and with our partner groups. And we hope to continue to provide more conversations like this in the future and work together to make a little more action on EPR and other ways of safely disposing, reusing, recycling our waste. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.